Kansas City Chiefs running back room is lacking a little bit of pop today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Hey, Chiefs Kingdom, welcome back for another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you for always making Locked On Chiefs your first listen of the day. Don't forget we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well. I am Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. He is Ryan Tracy, that way, from RGR Football and NFL 33. Yeah, it's not as easy as it looks because it's backwards from what you would think. It is what it is. Today, we're talking about the running backs, how this is going to play into Kansas City as they prepare for training camp, which is a little over 2 weeks away. We're going to talk about the run for the roster a little bit later. We're going to talk about the Chiefs running back core contributors in the next segment, but we're going to start today with talking about Isaiah Pacheco and how he headlines a running back room that has a little bit of questions. But before we get there, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right. This is a positional group that I think maybe a month or two ago I was feeling pretty good about, but the longer it's stayed the way it is, the less I feel good about it at this point. I hate saying that because I still think that Pacheco has the ability to be effective in this offense, and I like what Kareem Hunt can bring, but it still doesn't seem to have a home run hitter, and I think that could be a problem.
I think there's potential for a home run hitter, and we can definitely talk about that. But I will say this, as far as like a leader, it's Pacheco. He is the top back. He's going to be given all the room that he needs to take that role and literally run with it as best as he can. And that's, I think, a good thing. Everything else after that, I understand how the lack of changes or additions can maybe kind of leave you feeling a little bit iffy, but in the end, they're going to run him until he doesn't run anymore. If he gets injured, obviously they'll trade him out, whatever. But that's really the plan. I don't think that's changed.
I agree, but that's kind of the problem because he's been injured just about every single year. Granted, he hasn't been injured and missed time in a couple of years, but he's been injured and had to have surgery after the season. And he got injured and was out for multiple games last year. And my issue is you have a guy that played really well on Kareem Hunt as your backup, who can step in and can be a short yardage guy and a goal line guy. And you have Elijah Mitchell, who could be a home run guy, but it also has an injury history. So you have issues there. And the question is, do you look outside the room currently and try to bring somebody else in?
Eventually you do. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's more on cut down day, maybe a couple days before that, than it is now. I don't think you need to be scrambling before training camp to go get another running back body because you don't know. Is Elijah Mitchell like to the point where he understands this is kind of his last hurrah? Does that mean that he's trained up and he's in better shape, so maybe he can avoid some of the injuries he's had in the past? That would certainly help. Talking heads around the nation want to put Rashard Smith into this like third down back role, like he's going to walk in and take it. Like I'm just like, you all got to relax a little bit. He is an option though, and so that's a plus as well. Would they add to it? Do they want to carry 4, including a fullback, or do they want to carry 4 total? 4 running backs themselves, and maybe you keep the fullback, whatever they decide, right? I think that comes into the competition that we have to see the first couple of weeks in camp, specifically once the pads come on and somebody gets hit. First game or 2 of the preseason, see who survives, because you're absolutely right. There is a lot of injury history here. But I do like the fact that with Pop's back in full, you're not trying to make Kareem into something he's not. He's not a 1,000-yard back. No, he is a spot duty backup with a lot of goal line potential. And then that's catching the ball as well.
Yeah, and I think that he can fulfill his role great. And I think, when we talk about core contributors, we're going to have a lot to talk about when it comes to Kareem Hunt and Elijah Mitchell and maybe even Rashard Smith. I guess I'm looking at it from the aspect of, could they go out and could they find somebody that could step in and maybe be a change of pace that they don't really have on the roster right now, that also could possibly be a special teamer that could help them with kickoffs and punt returns, because that could play into who makes the roster. And when you talk about Brashard Smith, him making the roster is probably more contingent on his time as a returner than it is as a running back.
I think you're probably right. And folks, this is a special edition live show as we go through here. And there's a lot of things coming in the next week, but we want to give you some of these every now and then. So thanks for Britt for making his comment. And you guys are welcome to throw them in the chat, and we'll try to bring those up when you get there. And Pops does deserve the carries. I completely agree. I will say the other thing, though, when it does come down to that, the couple of practices after the second preseason game, that's when you're going to know whether they feel they have to go out and get more talent.
Yeah.
And they'll be sweeping the pro film to see who might come available.
And the other thing that actually plays into this, and I know we're talking running backs, but it plays into the entire roster. They have a Trey Smith deadline next week, basically a week from today. And if they don't get him signed, good luck being able to bring somebody else in, because the cost is going to be prohibitive, more than likely, if they want to go out and get a running back to kind of help out right now. We're on Trey Smith watch. I haven't seen any real updates. It seems pretty quiet, which sometimes can be a good deal.
It means they're not trying to make a statement in the media and the press. So that, I think, in essentially is a good thing. Let's hope that it also means that they're making progress. That is the question mark.
Yeah, it's definitely the question mark. And if you missed it last week, I gave you a guess as to what I thought the contract could be for Trey Smith on last Thursday, and we'll see whether or not I get it right if they end up getting him extended. But that could lead into whether or not Kansas City could add a running back. But let's talk about some of the core contributors that they have at the position right after this.
There's nothing like the atmosphere of the NBA playoffs. Every bucket, defensive stop, and moment feels huge. It's electric in those arenas. And with Gametime, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. I use it all over the place for every sports, every event I can get there, I do. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets last minute or not with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, all you got to do is create an account, redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. It's last minute tickets, it's lowest prices, and it's guaranteed.
Core contributors at the running back position include several guys that have been here for a couple of years, that were here last year, and another one that was added in the offseason. Elijah Mitchell is the guy that was added in the offseason. Obviously, Brashard Smith is maybe a guy that we'll talk about, I think, really in the run for the roster. But when you start looking at Kareem Hunt, he's going to be here. He's going to be basically your third down back, a pass catching back out of the backfield, and also more than likely your goal line guy. And then you have a question, and this is the one where I don't know where to put him. I would say he's in run for the roster, and I think you're going to hate that, but I don't know that Carson Steele makes this section right now.
He does.
Okay, I disagree.
People see, I know, I hear where you're coming from, because you look at it and it's like, okay, how can they really keep 5? And that's a legitimate question. But every time we did this with Sherm, right, where it's like, I don't know, they don't use him enough. Is it really justified? Is special teams enough to keep him? And he ends up keeping a fullback. And so, like, yep, I'm relying on history to kind of foreshadow the fact that I think Andy wants a true fullback on the roster to go to if he has to, and to just be a core special teams player if he needs to in the meantime. So I'm still leaning towards Carson Steele has a spot on this roster.
Well, we will see. I think the biggest difference between now and then is the depth at the offensive line position, which we'll talk about in another episode. But I think that could really play into how this is going to play out, because it's not just offensive line, it's defensive line. And you're more than likely keeping, I would say, 19 to 20 guys at those two positional groups alone. And that's going to hamper where you can keep other players.
Keeping other players is a delicate balance. And I think it's more difficult this season than most, with this running back room, with like you said, a third down back, definitely a goal line back. And I think, honestly, it's sometimes to spell Pacheco. I think Hunt has a bigger role. They were forcing to force feeding him all those carries and yards up front. I thought he hit the wall pretty hard. Guy his age coming off the couch totally makes sense. And thank you, Britt. We appreciate you. I think this year, having had the time to train, knowing that he's back in a read system, having OTAs that, I mean, you heard Jerry Tillery talk about like the pace of practice, even at OTA level, which is all he's experienced to this point, is still a step above. So it makes me feel like Hunt should be able to come in and take 10 carries a game and be a true committee back, be a true number 2 to do it.
Let me ask you a question on that in that regard. Do you think that him not practicing at all, him not having training camp last year, affected how well he was able to have staying power late in the season, and him having training camp and having OTAs and having all that, getting ready for the season will allow him to be able to be more effective on a longer time frame for the Chiefs this year?
I think it's a combination. I do think missing camp in the beginning of the season definitely had a detrimental effect on his ability to persevere through the season, right? I think part of the hey, he hit the wall a little bit earlier than we thought was part of that. I do think having preparation time this year should elongate that, but I also think that they need to manage his snaps, limit them a little bit to be a true number 2. I think he'll get some first down carries. He'll get some second down carries, but it will be in relief of Pops in order to keep Pacheco healthy as well, right? So I think it's all a balance. And I think both those things could lead to him being more effective on a limited role later into the season, if not the playoffs.
And you start looking at this room, and we've already talked about Carson Steele, and we disagree where we think he should be on this list. But regardless, if he makes the roster, he's going to probably be a guy that's making it because of special teams, not just because he plays fullback. That is definitely something that needs to be taken into account. And it's also possible he could be a kick returner. He did it last year. That also could play into him making the roster. So that's something to consider as well when you start talking about Carson Steele. But the other guy that they added this offseason is Elijah Mitchell. And he is electric. He has the ability to be that lightning rod and to be a guy that can hit it and take something the distance on a short carry and take it 70 yards. The question with him is, can he stay healthy? I am really excited to see him in this offense because I do think that Reed is going to know how to use him. And I think that having all 3 of these backs active on game day is going to be something that happens more often than most people would think. But I do think that he has an ability to do something on this roster and to do something for this team that no other Chiefs running back has.
Yeah, I think you have a very good point. I have a little bit of hesitation only because he was hurt last season. And not only does he have to remain unhurt, but we got to see if there's any lingering effects from that. Is he 95% of what he was before the injury last season? Great. Then absolutely he can be a home run hitter like you said. If it's more serious and he's only 80% of what he was, then that becomes more of a problem. Then that ties into, like you said, looking for a free agent pickup, somebody else is cut later in the preseason, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the big question I have with Mitchell is obviously can he stay healthy? But the thing that I like about it is the fact that he didn't play last year. And I know that would seem like a down point for most people, but at the same time, when you start talking about the type of player he is and the way that he is able to attack and his speed and his explosion, having that time away from the game, I'm not saying it's a great thing for him overall, but in a sense, it makes me feel better about his chances of being healthier and being maybe closer to the 100% that he was when he last played in 2023.
Let's hope so. I got my fingers crossed. That would be a very good trio of backs. All 3 can technically play on third down, Hunt and Mitchell in particular. Very, very comfortable on third down, which I think if it goes the way that I think it's going to be a little rough up front, especially the first quarter of the season, on getting significant chunk plays on the ground. I think they do have to concentrate on the run game a little bit more in order to bring some balance, help Mahomes out. But I think they might be in second and long, maybe more than they want to, which I think facilitates taking Pops out, bringing in Hunt, bringing in Mitchell a little bit more, so they'll get more passing touches is probably my guess.
Yeah, and the big question that's going to really go into this season is and we'll talk about this again later. The offensive line, the left side of the line, how are they going to look when the season starts? Is it going to be Simmons? Is it going to be Moore? Is it going to be Kingsley Suamati as your left guard? All that's going to play into how well they're able to run the ball. What is the chemistry like on that offensive line? And how is that going to play into things? The one thing that I will say Pacheco has struggled with his entire career is his vision. He hasn't had the greatest vision, and that has kept him at times from hitting some of the bigger holes that you would wish that he would hit, or cut back in times where you wish he would cut back. Hunt has that ability, but he doesn't have the speed of Pacheco to be able to make defenses pay for it.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have them as a super
combo.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, let's put them together like it's a Marvel Universe thing or something.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be a lot of fun to be able to see that. But I think that if Pacheco can get better in his vision just a little bit, it actually could be a huge boost for this offense, just because he's been so close to big plays if he just hits the right hole at the right time.
Yeah, it's the difference between a 4 or 5 yard gain that looked, hey, that was pretty decent, versus a 12-yard first down. He's putting the defense on their heels.
Well, and then you start talking about explosive plays, which Kansas City hasn't had a ton of, especially with Pacheco out last year. Kareem Hunt didn't have very many. Kareem Hunt didn't have many rushes that went over 10 yards, which really took down some of the explosive plays that this offense was able to have. You absolutely need to be able to run the ball and run it effectively, but you need to be able to hit those chunk plays from time to time in the running game to keep the defense honest as well.
It's absolutely key to keep the defense where you want it, not them putting you where they want it.
Yeah. A lot more to talk about when we get back. We're going to talk about the run for the roster and the running backs that could be making a push to make the roster in 2025. I'm not going to argue with you. I still think Carson Steele is in this group, but when you look at it, though, Brashard Smith is really the guy that I think we both agree would be in this group of run for the roster. Is it potentially possible he makes the roster? Yeah, and it's not just because of his ability to run the ball or catch the ball out of the backfield. It's special teams. But he is the guy that is probably the front runner of that group behind the top four that I will say includes Carson Steele right now.
Okay. I will take a different spin on that a little bit. It's not the foregone conclusion that the national talking heads want to make it that Brashard Smith is your third down back and he's going to get all these touches, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it's a question that he makes the roster, though. It's somewhere in between for me. And I'm not necessarily sold that it has to be on special teams. I do think, because of everything we've talked about, there is a possibility that in the coaches and the staff's mind, we got to have four because we got to have redundancy at the third down pass catcher type guy as well. We got to have redundancy as a speed guy as well. So when you have Elijah Mitchell as your first option in that kind of role, I think it almost relegates. You have to have a backup.
Yeah. Because you're worried about the potential for injury and him not being there. That makes a lot of sense. The one thing I will say, when you look at Brashard Smith, obviously he's the seventh round draft pick. Kansas City has cut guys that have been drafted in the seventh round. It happens. It is what it is. When you have a roster like the Chiefs have, you're not going to have all of those guys that you draft make the roster. He is by far, I think, the biggest question mark whether or not he makes the roster. Well, sorry, he is by far the guy that I think has the best chance at the running back position. But you also have Elijah Young as well. And we don't have a ton of information on him right now. Obviously, OTAs and minicamp is all we really have the information on. But it really is going to come down to what does he show in training camp. Obviously, when you start talking about training camp, it's, okay, the running back drills, Elijah Young is probably going to be the last running back on the drills. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But what does it look like when he gets on the field? Is he able to make people miss? Can he make a name for himself in the preseason? But you have to say that with the caveat of it's the preseason. And how many years has Kansas City had a fourth string running back that is just taken off in the preseason games?
Yeah. There's a couple of things here. You have to produce missed tackles if you are UDFA trying to make it on a roster. It doesn't matter how you do it. You can play the power game, run people over. You can put your foot in the ground and make people miss. Doesn't matter, but you have to produce missed tackles because you don't have an option. You'll be running behind the second and third team offensive lines. It's more on you than it is on the ones and twos to make plays themselves. But that has a tendency, because of the profile that the Chiefs chase after, meaning that they are either one extreme or the other, a power back or somebody that does have enough wiggle against threes that they can look explosive.
Right.
It's sometimes it fool's gold. The real question is going to be, what kind of role do we see him in? Is he the last guy through the drills and we don't see him in preseason game number 1 at all? If that's the case, then it's a lot of what we've seen in the past, in my opinion. But we get to preseason game number 1 and we see him to start the second half. Then they've seen enough in camp to give him an option to see, okay, show us what you can do now against competition. He does that, then preseason game number 2, maybe he gets a couple of touches earlier with the twos maybe. And that's how you can see him progress. Matt Derrick likes what he sees. I trust Matt's eye, and we talk to guys that are at practice because it's very, very narrow margins here, little things that you can glean before they actually put the pads on. So I trust Matt's eye. We'll talk to him on Wednesday, so don't miss that, folks. But I think there's a slim possibility. It's an open competition as far as I can see.
You know, the interesting thing when you start looking at Elijah Young and you start talking about past running backs in Kansas City and how they fared, let's not forget about Deneric Prince. And you have all these different guys that have shown up in preseason game 2 or 3 or 4 back when they had 4 that didn't make the roster that you thought were just going to be all-stars. The key, and I think this is a great point of what you said, is where do they play him in the first game? But more importantly, where do they play him in the second game? Because if he shows up with the twos, that means something. And we haven't said this yet this year, but it's something that you and I always say. You want to know who's going to make this roster? Watch your core special teamers in the first half in both preseason game number 1 and preseason game number 2, because Tobe is trying to get those guys ready to make a contribution on the roster. That's how you're going to know who is where, and whether or not he can be a returner or he is just a guy that comes in and is a core special teamer in 2 or 3 different phases or 2 or 3 different ways in special teams. That's how he can also make the roster, because he's got to unseat Brashard Smith, who I do think has a lock, well, not necessarily a lock, but has a front runner role right now as a returner.
Yeah, because Smith allows you, if he can satisfy that return role, he allows you to unlock the wide receiver room, whether it's not putting Xavier in that position or whether it's not relying on Romeo to do both or that kind of thing. Either way, we got to remember, and this is how I feel about the whole room, and Elijah Young is in a position to reap the benefits if they really get to the point where, like, okay, hold on. Smith still isn't really a running back. He's still more of a wideout playing a running back role. This is much like, I could see the slow burn come for this season, much like we saw with Tyreek Hill, where his athleticism was instant, but learning how to be the wide receiver that he was transitioning to versus Smith learning how to be the running back that he's transitioning to. And I do think that will continue. I think it could be something of a similar path. Not that Smith can be Tyreek Hill.
Well, why do you want to say he can be Tyreek Hill? Come on.
Only one cheetah.
You don't want to put that out in the universe?
I don't need Tyreek coming back at me.
I don't think it's going to be just Tyreek. There would be a ton of people that would be coming back at you. No, but I get your point. I mean, when you look at this, Brashard Smith has the ability. He was a wide receiver, now turning to running back. The question is, can he do enough to force himself onto the roster to have a chance to be a guy that can contribute for the Chiefs, not necessarily in 2025, but be even a guy that maybe could be contributing in 2026? Because the reality right now is he's the only one on the roster, and I'm not counting Elijah Young or Carson Steele. He's the only one on the roster that has a contract in 2026.
Mm-hmm. That does.
Pacheco doesn't. Elijah Mitchell doesn't. Kareem Hunt doesn't. None of them right now are going to be on this Chiefs roster in 2026. So I do think that if it's close, that could actually play into whether or not he makes the roster, because I do think that they are not going to want to have to rebuild the entire running back room in 2026, even though I'm sure you could probably bring some guys back if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think that's probably a possibility. I do think there will be running backs cut this preseason that fit the Chiefs better than they fit anywhere else. So one man's garbage is another man's gold, and we may see that happen as well.
Yep, another man's trash is another man's treasure. We will see if that is able to happen. I'm really going to be curious to see whether or not the Chiefs take 4 or 5 running backs. We're going to have to do a roster prediction at some point in the near future, and that's not going to be fun. Matt and I did one a couple weeks ago, and it is not a fun ordeal. Just trying to get through and trying to figure out how you're going to get all the players that you want on this roster. And the reality is that we have some guys that we have right now as making the roster that probably won't make the roster because we haven't seen what's been going on in OTAs. We haven't been seeing all the meetings and everything else in minicamp. But when training camp opens, that's when you really get an idea as to how this team is shaking out, where players are, how much have they improved from what they did last year, and what could they possibly give you in 2025.
Yeah, it's a tall list. An iceberg. Some of that comes into the cornerback room. We're going to run them down coming up here very soon. So hold your question. We appreciate you throwing it out there. But yes, 13 corners on the roster. Somebody's got some value somewhere. Maybe that makes room for one of these running backs.
Trade a few to Miami. Yep, they probably need one after the big trade that they had. There's going to be a lot more that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be breaking down another positional group tomorrow. Matt Derrick will return on Wednesday. Do not miss it. We are here for you 5 days a week, and training camp is right around the corner, and we will have Trey Smith news when it breaks. Thank you for listening today, and we will talk to you tomorrow.